Welcome to part 1 of my Laylax Rail Interface System upgrade for the Type 89 AEG. Before I start, let's just have a quick look at the two components involved. Of course, the first thing is the Type 89 AEG itself. And as you can see here, I've already installed the Laylax stock upgrade to this AEG. It's not the standard Type 89 stock there. But most importantly, here we have the Laylax Rail Interface System. Now this is a two-part component comprising of the top spine or scope rail here and the bottom foregrip rail system here. These are attached to one another by means of these Allen screws running along the top of the spine. In due course we'll have to take these two parts to bits. Okay. Now before I start, let's just have a quick run through of what we will have to do to the Type 89 to prepare it for this upgrade, because it's not straightforward. We will have to dismantle quite a few components on this AEG. The first thing we'll have to do, of course, is remove the flash hider, then the front plastic stock, which is pretty straightforward. It's held on by this little retaining pin. After we've done that, we'll have to remove the front iron sight, and then we'll have to remove the upper receiver so that we can take off the rear iron sight and this small plate here, which is a retaining plate for a scope rail accessory. So let me just do that before we continue. Okay. Having removed the front end components, which you can see here, we have the front plastic stock, flash hider, front iron sight and the retaining pin for the stock itself. We are now ready to move on to the next part of our disassembly of the Type 89. Now additionally, what I've done is taken the rail interface system apart. You can see here the spine or top rail component and the foregrip component here. Now a tip at this point, what I strongly advise you to do for this upgrade, as with any upgrade I suppose, is to keep a little container here for all little screws and bolts, because these will have a nasty habit of hiding from you in the most inconvenient of moments, so just try and keep them together safely. Okay, to continue with the upgrade. The first part of this upgrade is really to fit the top rail to the top of the receiver, like so. Now the thing that is stopping it at the moment is, first of all, the rear iron sight, and secondly this top rail component. So unfortunately we have to do a little bit more dismantling before we can get to these parts. What we will have to do is remove the top receiver, and we'll do this by removing the screws which attach the hop-up assembly and front barrel assembly to the receiver. We'll also have to remove the retaining pin that holds the barrel assembly to the receiver as well. I've actually already done this. Oops, excuse me while I focus. That is the pin which goes in this little slot here, which retains the whole barrel assembly. I've just done that beforehand because it's more convenient when I'm working one hand with the camera. So let's go ahead and just remove the receiver, shall we? Okay, having removed the retaining screws which attach the barrel assembly to the receiver, it's just a case of slipping off the barrel assembly, which I'll do now. Let's see if I can do this one-handed, which I cannot. No, I can. Here we go. Sorry about that. Oh, comedy of errors as usual. Okay, there you can see the hop-up there. Hope you can see that, the barrel assembly, which we'll put down there. And that now means that we can remove the upper receiver area from the lower receiver. Okay, oh that's easy, that's easier. There we go. There's the upper receiver part there, removed from the lower receiver. Now, the reason we're doing this, as I said earlier, were to remove these top components here, the little scope rail component and the rear metal sight. And that's done if I turn the upper receiver over by removing the 4 screws that you may be able to see inside the receiver there. Now be very, very careful. I've already done a test disassembly of this just to see how everything worked. And what I find is this top receiver on the Type 89 is actually a 2-piece component. Don't know, can you see that? There's a split in the receiver there. You can just see that. And as soon as you unscrew those 4 screws in the top of the receiver, the upper receiver will fall into 2 halves. So just be prepared for that. So I'll just go ahead now and remove these 2 top components. Okay, I've now taken the top components off the top receiver, and you can see here the rear metal sight, the little scope rail component which fits on, or did fit on there, like so. But there's also a third part, which is this little latch system, which actually fits, if I can just put it back in, at the rear of the upper assembly. That actually falls out when you take off these 2 screws. So remember to keep that safe. And as you can see, we're now starting to collect quite a range of components here and quite a lot of screws as well. Okay. Right, what do we do next? Well, let's just get rid of these components which we don't need anymore and look at the upper receiver itself. Now you can now probably see that split in the upper receiver. This is actually 2 component parts, so be very careful here because it all came to bits when I first disassembled this. Oops, as you can see, it is nearly doing now. It's going to fall to bits, I can tell. You can see inside here the 4 screw holes, and that is how we're going to fix the spine rail system to the upper receiver, which I'll do next, hopefully before this all falls to bits. Having attached the upper spine rail to the upper receiver by means of those 4 screws there, we now have to reattach the upper receiver to the lower receiver. This is simply done by sliding on the upper receiver onto the lower receiver like so. It's not an operation I can do easily one-handed, or properly I should say, so I'll just cut away now and do that before we continue. Here we have the upper receiver successfully fitted back onto the lower receiver. Now before I end this first part of my Laylax Rail Interface System upgrade, I would just like to point out one thing, and that's when fitting the upper receiver back onto the lower receiver, do make sure that the fire selector switch moves freely once you've fitted the upper receiver back on. Now the reason I say this is it's a very, very tight squeeze inside here, and the fire selector cogs are just on the other side of this receiver, so the last thing you want to do is obstruct them, fit everything back together, and then find out that you can't actually move the fire selector switch. So just check to make sure all that works before you start fitting everything together. Well, that's about it for the first part of this upgrade. We've successfully fitted the upper spine onto the upper receiver of the Type 89. In the next part, I will fit the fore-end rail onto the front barrel assembly, and then we can put all these components back together again and hopefully have a rather nice looking upgrade.